So, Pokémon Crystal. In my last video, I revisited Gold and Silver, and following the pattern set by Pokémon Yellow in the previous generation, this was released around a year later as a third, upper version to those games. As I said before, the purpose of these third versions was mainly to serve as an expanded and enhanced take on the story, setting, and gameplay of the originals. Really, it was pretty similar in concept to newer games providing fixes and adding content through paid DLC or live service. This is what the Pokémon series eventually pivoted to doing instead of having upper versions, except the older games predate DLC and live service being commonplace, so what they would do instead is just release a new separate version with the additional content and supposed enhancements baked in. It was a pretty redundant way of releasing games, but if they were going to do it like this, one would hope that these upper versions would at least be an unambiguous improvement over the original releases. In my video on Gold and Silver, I walked away thinking they were okay, but had a lot of room for improvement. I thought that a different game built from the exact same engine could probably be really good, but that, due to a number of questionable design choices, Gold and Silver just didn't quite live up to that potential. Pokémon Crystal was an opportunity to address those issues and maybe live up to the full possibility of what the previous Gen 2 games could have been. So, does it? Well, I guess that's what we're gonna find out. You can now play as a girl. That's pretty much the only obvious change at the very start of the game. Unlike Pokémon Yellow, Crystal isn't designed to mimic a specific character's journey, so you're just given a selection between the same trio of starter Pokémon as the original Gen 2 games. This time, I picked Cyndaquil. I actually have to follow up on one of the comments I made here in my Gold and Silver video, where I said that I thought the Johto starters all perform pretty similarly. While I do think it's true that there's no obvious weak link among the starters in nearly the same way as Charmander in the Kanto games, throughout most of this playthrough, I had a considerably harder time with Cyndaquil than I did with Totodile. It had nothing to do with the stats or typing of Cyndaquil or their evolutions, really. It was mainly because they didn't learn a better move than Ember until the level 30s. And even then, it's just Flame Wheel. Flamethrower doesn't come until level 60, which you're unlikely to even reach in the average playthrough. Totodile's level up learn set may not be any better. In fact, looking at it, it might actually be even worse. But that evolutionary line got heavily bailed out by the fact that the Surf HM and the Elemental Punches were available from quite early on. The Cyndaquil family technically benefits from these as well, but not until they're fully evolved, which, unlike the Totodile family, doesn't happen until level 36. If you saw my Gold and Silver video, you might remember that I was practically at the Elite Four by the time I got to that level. And while I've never picked Chikorita in Gen 2, looking at their level up learn set, things don't look great for them either. So, that's already one major criticism I had with Gold and Silver that Crystal did not address: the very poor availability of the moves in a lot of Pokemon's learn sets. I guess they did at least add a move tutor in the game corner that could have allowed Typhlosion to learn Flamethrower at a lower level, except not only is everything in the game corner obscenely expensive for what they are, they also only appear after you've completed the main adventure. Speaking of, another one of the biggest issues I had with Gold and Silver was that a significant portion of the game's Pokédex, most notably many of the newly introduced Gen 2 Pokémon, were locked to the post-game for no good reason. So, what did Crystal do to amend this? Not much, to be honest. They did make a few changes, like, oh shit, look at that! I got a shiny Electabuzz! Not really. It's from the Odd Egg, one of the few encounters that was added in Crystal. It might be one of the most asinine methods of obtaining a Pokémon throughout the entire series. It can be one of 7 different species at complete random, with no in-game way of finding out which one it is until you take the time to hatch it. It's determined at the moment you receive the egg as well, so soft resetting to get the one you want is beyond tedious. And for most of these species, this is the only way to get it during the main adventure. Aside from this once per se file gacha game, to my knowledge the only ways in which Pokemon were added to the main adventure of this game compared to Gold and Silver are Sneasel can now be found in the Ice Path, Cubone can now be found in the Game Corner, and they gave you the ability to obtain the evolutionary stones during the main adventure. Certain NPCs can call you on the Pokegear and give them to you. The guy who gives you Firestones was the only person I gave my number to in this playthrough, and I deleted it as soon as he ceased to be useful to me. I already talked about how much the Pokegear sucks in the last video. And that's the full list. It consists mostly of Pokemon that were technically in the main adventure of Gold and Silver, just not fully evolved, and most of the rest were returning Pokemon from Gen 1 and their pre-evolved forms. Gen 2 Pokemon like Houndoom, Murkrow, Misdreavus, Magcargo, Blissey, and Porygon 2 are all still nowhere to be found until after you've defeated the champion. I guess there is Larvitar. They did change it so Larvitar is available earlier than it was originally, but still only in the post-game, so what's the point? In fact, looking at the version exclusives, they actually took away nearly as many Gen 2 Pokemon as they added in this game. Okay, for the first time since literally the intro of the game, I actually have a difference from Gold and Silver to talk about. You may have noticed in the footage that Crystal is the first game in the series where the Pokemon have animated battle sprites, and they legitimately look great. It's up there with my favorite sprite work in the whole series, rivaled only by Generation 5. The only thing that's a bit annoying is that when you turn move animations off, these get turned off as well, when I'd prefer those things be toggled separately. I generally like to have move animations turned off whenever I'm going through a long gauntlet of unimportant trainers, because the extra few seconds each move animation takes do stack up and can make those sections feel really slow, but I don't mind the sprite animations in this way. They're really quick by comparison and don't happen quite as often. Anyway, what about the trainers you're fighting against? Normally, in an upper version, this is one of the biggest changes. The opposing trainers, especially the bosses, will often have updated teams, usually with the intent of either making them more difficult, better showcasing the availability of certain Pokemon, or a mix of both. However, Pokémon Crystal is the only upper version in the series where not a single change was made to any trainer's team. Every single one of them uses the exact same Pokemon, at the exact same levels, with the exact same movesets. My experience was different sometimes. Bugsy was easier because this time I had a fire type that resisted his moves. Whitney was harder, taking me 2 attempts this time because I didn't have any setup or status moves. My battle with Morty was possibly the stupidest of all time, with his Gengar trapping my Eevee with Mean Look, leaving them stuck on the field with both Pokemon being immune to each other's moves. This went on for about 50 turns before his Gengar finally ran out of moves and KO'd my Eevee with struggle. I'd have reset, but I couldn't remember when I'd last saved. The rivals seemed to want revenge for me saying I wasn't that fond of his character in the last video, and I lost to him twice in Goldenrod Tunnel purely because my Pokemon hit themselves in confusion about 18 times in a row. And why do you... I'm pretty sure that's like 6 turns in a row or something where my Pokemon has been confused and they've hit themselves. Can they actually fuck off with Confuse Ray? Finally, one of my Pokemon hits through it. It's not even enough to KO. Just crit it this time so I don't have to deal with it. Like, oh my god. And watch, we'll hit ourselves in confusion again. Yep, called it. This Golbat is like the most what the fuck is this luck? Just hit. That's like 9 turns in a row where the Pokemon just wouldn't attack. Like, it's a 50% chance each time, and he's gotten it like 18 turns in a row. This Golbat is the luckiest motherfucker in the world. And watch, this will be another hit in confusion. This is ridiculous! What are the odds of this? The odds of that had to be like decimals. Will went similarly on my first attempt at the Elite Four. I just all around had a terrible time with confusion in this playthrough. And Lance was tougher, both because I was somehow even more underleveled than I was last time, and because, aside from Electabuzz, my team was pretty terribly tight-matched with his. He took me the same number of attempts as the last video, but my winning battle was a lot luckier, with him missing Hyper Beam at a pretty critical moment. But none of that has anything to do with the fact that I was playing Crystal, at least directly. It just came down to differences in my luck, and in the Pokemon I was using on my team. The NPC trainers themselves were all identical, and as such, all of the issues I had with them in Gold and Silver, from the level curve to the lack of Gen 2 Pokemon on most of the boss's teams, are all still present in this version. This begs the question. So, how is Pokémon Crystal actually different from Gold and Silver? The biggest change so far has probably been the animated battle sprites. Well, they did make a few changes to the story, but they were quite minimal, to say the least. You can fight Suicune as a normal field encounter, at the same point where you would have fought Ho-Oh or Lugia in the originals. I hated the roaming legendary mechanic in Gold and Silver, and this would have made catching the set marginally more tolerable, but you still have to catch the other two as roamers, and after my experience catching Raikou in the last video, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. The new theme they gave them in this game is pretty cool at least. They also added this guy who talks to you a few times named Yucine. I don't really know what the point of his character is, to be honest. He just shows up periodically, fanboys about Suicune for a line or two, and then leaves. I don't even think his existence is acknowledged by a single other character or NPC, Suicune included. There's this added scene with Claire, the final gym leader, where she's made into a much more unlikable character for some reason. In the original, she was somewhat stubborn and reluctant to give you the badge, but ends up conceding of her own accord. In this game, she makes you take a whole additional test, and when you pass, she throws a full-on temper tantrum and basically has to be threatened into giving you the badge. You're also given a Dratini as a reward for passing the test. I was actually considering this for my team, originally, but after the last game, where my Pokemon weren't even level 40 by the time I got to the League, I realized that would not be a good idea. And finally, there was an event, meaning not something you can even do legitimately today, unless you're playing the Virtual Console re-release, where you could catch the mythical Pokemon Celebi. I generally don't enjoy catching these boss Pokemon, but thankfully, it has a far more reasonable catch rate than Lugia or Ho-Oh did in the last game, so it only took a few balls. So, you catch the legendaries in a bit of a different order. Some random weirdo NPC with basically no impact on the plot talks to you a few times. There's a dialogue tree with this guy, and one more special encounter that you can catch, but at least in the original release, only through an event. Is that all? Well, I guess there is one more thing. The last new thing I haven't talked about is the Battle Tower, the first of its kind in the mainline games. I only messed around with it in the post-game, but unlike its later appearances, you can actually challenge this from pretty early on in the main adventure if you wish to. Not that you're likely to get very far with it at that point. The idea is that you have 3v3 battles against trainers with random teams at fixed levels, and you have to win 7 battles in a row in order to beat the challenge. I tried it a good few times, but I never got any further than the second opponent. The opposing Pokemon in here are extraordinarily tough compared to those used by other NPC trainers, all having really good stats that are completely maxed out. For you to stand any sort of realistic chance, you have to train your Pokemon to be the same way, which is an ordeal, to say the least. I do actually plan on indulging in these battle facilities more in the later games, but I just don't really know much about how stat training actually works in the Game Boy generations. While I said in my Gold and Silver review that the battle system has largely gone pretty unchanged since this generation, and that is true for the most part, there is one thing that was overhauled so massively that it's the primary reason why Gens 2 and 3 are the only pair of sequential generations that cannot be transferred between, and that's the way the stats are calculated. I'm used to EVs, IVs, and Natures. DVs and stat experience are pretty foreign to me. It's probably not that difficult to figure out, but there also just isn't that much to this iteration of the Battle Tower. There are only 21 potential Pokemon the opponents can have in each level group, so even if you don't win, you'll still wind up seeing about all there is to see in just a few attempts. And there are no streaks, or points, or achievements to earn like there are in some of the later games, just the standalone 7-battle challenge. And that's it. That is everything in Pokémon Crystal that is actually different from Gold and Silver. Generally, in the Pokémon games, more content is always better, but quite frankly, aside from maybe the animated battle sprites, I don't think I'd sorely miss any of this stuff if I were to just play the originals instead. There's really nothing new to say about the post-game. Somehow, even less is different here than during the main adventure. Again, I had a different experience with some bosses, but it was just due to my own luck and team composition being different. None of these bosses have been changed either. When I eventually got to Red, once again, I gave it a shot at the level I happened to be at. While this team did get a bit further than my team in Silver were able to on their first attempt, it was still pretty clear that I was going to have to grind in the Elite Four. Again. This was easily my least favorite part of my experience with Gold and Silver, and, along with most other things, this has not changed in Crystal. I did discover one thing, though. Remember in my last video how I said that Lance is actually really cheesable if you have the right Pokemon for it? Well, it turns out Electabuzz might be one of those Pokemon. While I was grinding, she outsped and one-shot all 6 members of Lance's team. It's not a perfect experiment, as she was slightly overleveled at this point, but I do know for fact that at least the Gyarados and the first 2 Dragonites, which happen to be the first 3 Pokemon she baits out, are total gimmies. Anyway. After spending far longer than I would have liked battling the same 5 trainers over and over, I got my Pokemon up about 7 levels and gave Red another shot. It took a bit of trial and error to find a reliable line, but after a few attempts, I was very consistently 1v1ing his team. Except I was just barely missing the 2-shot on his Blastoise, and losing because of that. Now, I know the logical thing to do here would have been to just go back to the Elite Four and gain a few more levels, but honestly, at this point, I really just wanted to be done. Practically all of my biggest problems with these games were coming out in this one battle, from the awful level curve, to the unavailability of certain moves that would have made this battle a bit more doable, to the fact that certain items that would have made the battle a bit more doable were only available by jumping through hoops with the in-game clock, which is a whole other thing that, for the sake of pacing, I've barely even gotten into, maybe when I get to the remakes. As much as I think Gold, Silver, and Crystal really are not bad, by the end of my second venture through Generation 2, my patience with its flaws was starting to wear quite thin. So, I just brute forced it. I went through the battle again, at the exact same levels with the exact same strategy, and after another attempt or two, I got a battle where his Blastoise missed with Blizzard, allowing me to get in a little bit of extra chip damage with my Kingdra before it went down, which allowed Electabuzz to get a clean 2-shot. Not the most satisfying win, but at least we got there. When I eventually get to having a full ranking of this series, Crystal is going to be in a very awkward position. While it is probably better than Gold and Silver, and absolutely better than Red, Blue, and Yellow in a vacuum, out of the games I've covered so far, this has easily been the one that's annoyed me the most, largely because I think it ultimately fails in its purpose as an upper version. I didn't think Yellow was a great upper version either, but that at least made more of an attempt to differentiate itself, and addressed some of the issues I had with Red and Blue. Crystal was their chance to give the Gen 2 Pokemon better representation and add some more to the boss's teams. But they didn't. This was their chance to fix Johto's atrocious level curve and have the random trainers actually scale with your level throughout the game. But they didn't. This was their chance to address Gen 2's prominent availability issue, change up the learn sets a bit, and give the player access to the Pokemon and items that were needlessly locked to the postgame in Gold and Silver. But they didn't. Or they barely did. I know that for a game that I claim I really think is okay, I've been quite negative throughout this whole video. The thing is that I spent pretty much all the goodwill I had for this generation on Gold and Silver already. Maybe if Crystal had actually improved upon them or added anything worthwhile, I would have had something new to say, but it didn't.